with us. Joining us in this segment of After Hours, Robert Joy from JMZ Architects and Planners out of Glen Falls, New York. And Robert was a former board member of SCUP, still very much involved with them. And thanks for joining us on the program.
You're welcome, John. It's wonderful to be here with all our colleagues.
Let's get into the architectural end of things, because so much of this focus has been on education. And as Dennis has driven home in previous conversations, obviously the space comes into play quite a bit. I mean, you can have the best curriculum going, and if the space is distracting or not adequate, that education gets lost.
Exactly. I always recall the quote that's been attributed to Winston Churchill. He said, "First we define our space, and then it defines us." So we as architects do is obviously create spaces for learning, spaces for universities, for colleges, spaces for students, both from classroom space, office space, housing, the full gamut. And the importance of being here at SCUP is that we're meeting with colleagues who actually are at universities, who are presidents and provosts and space planners and facility directors and so forth, and having a dialogue with them, which is very important to us if we're in that field.
What are you surprised to hear from these educators in regard to what you do?
Well, some things aren't surprising. There's always issues of budget. There are always issues of space equity.
Yeah.
Always issues of who controls space, who gets space, who doesn't get space, and so forth. But what is surprising is I think people are learning and embracing SCUP's concept of integrated planning. And that is getting away from the silos, which are so prevalent in higher education, as they are elsewhere.
Right.
But looking at planning as an exercise that involves budget folks, facilities folks, academic folks, student life folks, everybody across the university that is involved with it, and bringing them together in an integrated way. And that's really the hallmark of SCUP's approach, and that's what we do really well here.
How much has technology entered into what you do as an architect that maybe wasn't there 10 years ago? Because by the time I put the iPhone in my pocket and walk out of the store, it's an old model.
Right.
You know, it just changes that fast.
Well, it's interesting. I've talked about, as an architect, we're designing facilities because they have such a long shelf life and take so long to plan and build. If you're doing a science building, typically it takes 12 years from the first time you say, you know, we need a new science building, to when you cut the ribbon. I mean, colleges move with glacial majesty. But we are designing as architects classrooms and facilities for students who haven't been born yet, who will be taught by faculty who aren't there yet, teaching subject matter that hasn't been discovered yet, using technology that hasn't been created yet. So it's not hard.
Oh, that sounds easy.
It's pretty much common sense, yes.
Do you have a crystal ball?
Crystal ball is flexibility. There is a philosophy that talks about buildings of being long life, loose fit, low energy. Very energy efficient buildings, but not so tightly designed for a particular program because you don't know if it's going to be there in a few years or how it's going to change. So having some flexibility is something we're hearing a lot about here at the conference.
How much are you hearing from educational institutions saying, we need you to revamp this existing space, as opposed to, let's put a new building here?
Yes. If you're in the Northeast particularly, you better be into renovation of existing buildings.
Why the Northeast?
Because we have lots of space, lots of heritage colleges that have abundant space, but it's not the right type of space. We need to repurpose, renovate, redesign, and we've got campuses that are very historic. It's hard to build a new building. It's certainly hard to take down an old building. Much better to renovate the inventory that we've got. And we've got declining number of students. So it's not a question of needing more space. It's needing to get better use of our space.
And when you say it's hard to tear down an old building, I lived in a 120-year-old home in a historic neighborhood, and if I wanted to switch toilet paper brands, I had to get permission from the city.
Well, there's a committee.
So I think you then run
exactly.
Do you run into stuff outside of the institution? I mean, with like city government when you're dealing with historic stuff?
Of course,
like that?
the town and gown relationships, and so many small cities, particularly that have colleges, their identity is so tied to the college and the college to the city, they can't exist apart. And a lot of times we're looking at those relationships and helping to improve and facilitate those relationships.
Who do you have to listen to? I mean, say a university wants to add a building, and you've got alumni and donors coming at you saying, we don't want a building there. And you've got some of the administrators saying, yes, we want a building there. And you're getting different feedback from all sides. So who do you go with besides who's holding the checkbook?
Well, there is an old saying, he who pays the piper calls the tune.
Right.
But that's not entirely true and nowadays. And it used to be that communities that had colleges would pretty much let them do whatever they wanted, and their own little sort of like the Vatican. They had their own little city within the city. That's not so much the case anymore. They're being questioned about parking, about transportation, about the impact on the fire department, about, in part because they're tax exempt, but they're usually paying some sort of pilot or some sort of contribution to essential public services. So the sphere of influence, the number of people that you're talking to, the entities that you're talking to, are really growing and expanding. And I think the smart colleges now, and many of them are doing this, is they're having a continuing dialogue with their host communities or home communities, not just when they need a building improved. And for instance, in Canada, in the city of Quebec, the colleges there have a memorandum of understanding that's renewed every year with the city and with the mayor. And it's a big deal. And they talk about their mutual relationships and how that's going. So it's not just episodic, it's more continual, it's more a constant dialogue of understanding how important each is to the other.
Now, you mentioned repurposing a little while ago, and back in Missouri, one of our colleges in the university system seen a decline like many colleges have. And what they have decided to do is these dormitories that are no longer needed are being rented out as hotel rooms to people that come to town for football games or whatever.
Oh, interesting.
And I imagine they are not unique in that. I would think, schools have turned to do whatever they can do to bring in the revenue. But I would think you would be needed for that. Architects would be needed to change the face of that. Have you seen?
We've seen that, and I heard in a session this morning about colleges that were close to each other. A state university in I believe it was in California, and a community college that were cheek by jowl next to each other physically, but had always been separate. One was growing, the other had additional space, so they combined. They were using classrooms and empty dormitories to accommodate that, at least on a short-term basis. So that sort of cooperation and those sorts of agreements and creative thinking is really happening now out of necessity.